Hello, everyone, and welcome to Everyday Politics with Laura May Lindo. I am your host, Laura May. And today, as I tune in actually from my home in Kitchener on land that is held down, cared for, loved, and stewarded by the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Neutral people, I want to offer you this reflection. I have been thinking a lot about deep learning, and I have sort of been introduced to this idea listening to and being guided by Indigenous community members who in their fight for reconciliation and for sovereignty, remind us that we have to have a deeper understanding about each other. And that deeper understanding about each other is where we start to gain respect for doing things in different ways, approaching things in different ways, co-creating new types of knowledge, etc. And on this episode, the reason I'm thinking about that is because this episode is looking at Bill 166, the Strengthening Accountability and Student Supports Act 2024. And in this piece of legislation, the government aims to create policies to support students on campus, faculty and staff as well, we assume, with anti-racist policies and mental health policies. But some of the biggest criticism has actually been that we aren't learning deeply about the people that are impacted by these policies. And so I've invited two of my colleagues to come and speak to me about this bill. And I hope that you will enjoy it. I will get a chance to introduce you to my guests coming up right after this break.
Personal finance show that dares to ask those money questions you've always wanted to. Join Mike Bregueth when he talks with experts on all aspects of money. Money Matters with Mike Bregueth, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on Rogers TV.
Hey everybody, it's Sean Ferfaro reminding you to tune in every week for This Week in Rangers Nation. It's everything our town that you want to know about your Kitchener Rangers. Catch it every Friday at 6:30 p.m. right here on Rogers.
Hi, I'm Stacey Bester, the host of Sweet Occasions here on Rogers TV. I'm so looking forward to season 7, where we're serving up both sweet and savory dishes. I hope you'll tune in and enjoy all of the flavors that we have for you. And don't forget to make every day a sweet occasion.
It's closing time, and you stayed out longer than you planned. So now you can't drive, and the buses have stopped running. You could always call your girlfriend. Or maybe your roommate? What about your best friend? You could just dial 1-888-TAXI-GUY or use the Taxi Guy app. The call and the app are free, and they both connect you to a local cab company to bring you home safely. Visit arrivealive.org to find out more. Arrive Alive, drive sober.
Where will you win?
The opening tip. Here is Vince. Vicious slap. The NBA title is yours.
As we welcome a new era. Where will you hear the story?
Right to the rim with a slam dunk.
Catch the highlights. Dive into tapes.
It spins.
Where will you be when? Right here. Raptors basketball. Nothing but Sportsnet.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back. I am very excited to be speaking to both Honor and Jordana today about Bill 166. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thanks for having us.
So listen, I'm going to jump right in. And I just want to put a disclaimer. This first question is pure, unadulterated speculation because it was February 26, 2024, so tail end of Black History Month. And the Minister of Colleges and Universities at the time, the Honorable Jill Dunlop, tabled a piece of legislation, and it was called, it's Bill 166. It was called the Strengthening Accountability and Student Supports Act. And that bill actually received royal assent on May 16th, 2024. So when it receives royal assent, that means it officially becomes law. Out of pure curiosity and unadulterated speculation, what do you think that bill was meant to do?
Well, I mean, we could maybe begin by looking at what the bill included,
Sure.
and then kind of reflect on that. So this bill allows the Minister of Colleges and Universities to issue binding directives to one or more post-secondary institutions, so colleges and universities, on or off the public record, on anything that the minister deems falls into the broad categories of mental health and anti-racism. Okay. And so what we see there is a fundamental change in the way that universities are governed. For the past 100 years, the principle of university autonomy has been the governing principle that has taken the governing field around universities, and that has meant that universities are funded by provincial governments, but not governed or managed by those governments by and large, right? And there's an important independence there to protect. And so when that principle is kind of changed or altered or weakened, it raises a lot of questions around what a government is intending to do by increasing their control over what happens at universities. Yes.
Sorry, before you move forward from there, I want to talk about this notion of autonomy specific to equity policies and mental health policies. But I think we're going to zone in on the equity policies. And Jordan, I don't know if you want to jump in on this, but how did a university before this bill then decide how they were going to do their equity work? Like, what did that look like prior to this sort of, okay, the government is going to make some of these decisions?
Well, it would depend on at what level the equity work was happening, but universities have equity offices right now that are staffed with experts in their field, and their expertise comes from usually a combination of scholarly credentials and also kind of on the ground work. So, at my institution, we have both an equity office and also, an office of Indigenous relations. And, these offices, by virtue of being on campus, are able to kind of make and sustain relationships with students and with faculty and staff, the kind of stakeholders in their equity work, and use that in conjunction with their expertise to make decisions. So they're so differently positioned from the Minister of Colleges and Universities is to make decisions about equity and anti-racism.
And so I think I've said this in past episodes. When I first got into Waterloo Region, I came in as the Director of Diversity and Equity at Wilfrid Laurier University. And one of the things, I don't think we ever really had to speak to the minister about what it was that we were doing, or it didn't feel like it was guided by the ministry. It felt like it was guided by the needs on campus, right? But one of the interesting things in that role was that there were often discussions around accountability, but I feel like, and again, my speculation, I feel like the use of that term accountability in the name of the bill means something strikingly different than what it means when we're doing equity work. Am I onto something here, or do we think that am I missing something here? Like, how do you think they're using this term accountability in this bill? What does that mean for them?
I mean, I have two thoughts I'm a communication scholar, so I love getting into a single word, I mean, so from my understanding, and I say this primarily as, you know, a consumer of equity and anti-racism scholarship, as opposed to a, you know, a producer, but my understanding is that, you know, in equity and anti-racism work, accountability is often used as a more capacious kind of alternative to punishment, right? Accountability is a way of restoring relationship, addressing a harm that is more than simply penalizing somebody, based on lots of research, including by, you know, lots of Canadian, you know, scholars. I'm thinking about like Al Jones, you know, my colleague Johanna McCants Turner, right? A lot of scholars in transformative and restorative justice and abolitionist traditions that have said, you know, we should really be thinking about something more effective and more sustainable as a response to identity-based kind of harms than punishment. And that's where I see accountability coming in. And that does not seem to me to be how it's being used in the context of this bill.
I'm going to, so among the resources that I'm going to provide with this particular interview, I'll definitely have a link to Bill 166, but I'm going to also dig up some information around restorative justice practices so that people can actually read a little bit about what accountability in that lens might mean. Honor, if you think about what you've read in the bill itself, how closely does accountability reflect what Jordana was just saying? Is it saying something else?
Yeah, I think it's saying something very different. The kind of accountability that I see in the bill is very much like an individual kind of accountability that really is, I think, parallel to like a criminal justice kind of accountability. So the idea that if you have violated a particular policy in the university around racism, for instance, that you have done wrong and that you will be punished. And that is, I think, the type of accountability that that we can see in the bill. So I think very different. And I think it, because of that, runs some of the same risks that we find with criminal law, right? That people are going to be targeted in particular ways, right? That more vulnerable people are going to be targeted more often, and a lot of the other, I think, even ineffective elements of criminal law, right? That it's not an effective deterrent to just have a punishment for something, especially with something as complex as racism. Right?
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead, Jordana.
I read the accountability here, just adding to what Honor is saying, as holding universities accountable to government, as opposed to holding, holding students and faculty and, you know, community members accountable to each other in the event of harm. And I would just say, you know, one thing that I found really striking when I, you know, read this bill, just as a public communications scholar, is you would think that if a government was doing something to support students, Strengthen Accountability and Student Supports Act, that it would be really promoting that among students, that it would be boasting about that. Like, students have been asking for more support in all kinds of ways. And it was striking to me how under the radar this bill seemed to be. And to me, that suggests that this is not so much about supporting students, providing the kind of accountability that students want, as it is about kind of reconfiguring the relationship between the universities and the provincial government.
That's a really important point, because one of the challenges that I've seen, especially as I've been diving into doing these interviews around, you know, thinking about politics sort of in those everyday spaces, one of the biggest issues that we have is that legislation isn't necessarily brought to community in a real way for them to engage with. But when it comes to something like this, when we're talking about mental health and we're talking about equity policies or anti-racist policies on campus, If you're not talking to the people that you claim to be supporting, if they don't even know the bill exists, then that suggests to me as well that they will not be mobilizing said bill to get any of the help that they need, you know? I wonder if, as we think about that, because at this point, I don't think I've had any students come to me to talk about this bill. With the tensions that the bill has caused, and there has actually been a lot of pushback from the moment that they tabled the bill. Where has that pushback been coming from then? Is it faculty? Is it staff? Is it the university presidents? Is it students? Like who's been challenging this bill?
I think all of the above, really.
We don't like it.
There isn't a lot of support that we've seen, and there's an awful lot of opposition. The bill was opposed by all of the opposition parties in the legislature. It was opposed by all of the major organizations in the sector. So the COU, the Council of Ontario Universities, the Ontario Confederation of University Faculty Associations, OCUFA, and all of the other the federations and organizations, student organizations as well. And it was opposed also by a number of members of the public, a lot of public opposition, over 400 experts in anti-racism, anti-hate, and mental health signed an open letter against the bill, a scathing open letter. So, this is, there's a lot of opposition. I think people are, have seen, have a lot of concerns. Yeah.
I think that, so what I'm also going to do for folks is I'm going to see if I can dig up some of those opposition letters. Like I know I signed one. And so in full disclosure, as a person whose research and expertise lies in doing anti-racist work, I had some concerns about the bill. But what I find fascinating, part of why I'm sort of asking these general high-level questions, is that on the surface, the bill does not appear to be doing anything wrong. And I reread it actually before the interview, just a quick scan of it before the interview. And on the surface, it's saying have a plan. And so most people, if they just read the bill, would think that there's nothing wrong. But there's language inside the bill, and I think that's what we're going to shift to in our next question in the next segment. There's language in the bill around something called ministerial directives. And so what I'm going to do is we'll take a very quick break. And then we will come back, and I want us to jump right into this notion of these ministerial directives, and I'll get you folks to talk a little bit about what those are and what is said in there, because that piece isn't as public. So everyone go ahead, take a quick break, and we will be right back.
Hey guys, Steph here from The Cruise TV, the show where we talk about the people and stories behind the coolest cars on the road. Join us on Sundays at 8 p.m.
Hello, welcome to Lions TV Bingo. An announcement, we are now on Mondays. Yes, every Monday from now on, Lions TV Bingo is going to be here on Rogers. We'll see you this Monday.
Hey, Chef D here. Join me Saturdays at 4:30 for At Home with Chef D, season number 10. Thanks so much for that. Hey, we're going to go back old school. We're going to join Julia Child and Graham Kerr and some of their great recipes and share some of their passion with you. At Home with Chef D, Saturdays at 4:30. Won't you join me?
Cooking with Chef D.
Are you low on food? Struggling to pay the bills? Overwhelmed by life's challenges? When you need support but don't know where to turn, just dial 211. 211 connects you to the programs or services near you.
211, how can I help you?
211 211. Help starts here.
Wealth. The Royal City. Learn about the people, places, organizations, and events that make up your hometown. Join us each and every episode to learn more about wealth and what's happening in the Royal City.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. So I wanted to pick up on something that where we left off in the first question around these ministerial directives. I would argue that if somebody was just reading the bill, having an equity strategy or having a mental health strategy on a post-secondary campus, whether it's a college or a university campus, in and of itself is not a problem. But a lot of people, as we were saying, have raised some concerns around Bill 166, and they find it to be kind of troubling, especially in our current political and social climates. I'm wondering if you folks can speak a little bit about what these ministerial directives actually are and what you are seeing in those ministerial directives.
Yeah, I can start off looking at the anti-racism, anti-hate directive. This directive requires universities and colleges to craft and to post publicly and to advertise internally a complaints mechanism through which members of the university community can file complaints against other members of the university community for violating the institution's anti-racism, anti-hate policy. And it also stipulates some requirements that policy must have, and that there must be consequences for being found to have violated the policy. And these can include dismissal, expulsion, that there be interim measures whilst an investigation is ongoing, that there must be anonymous complaints, and so on.
Sorry, I'm making the anonymous complaints. I have so many feelings about that. So first off, for those that are watching and that may not know, there is a big difference between the bill itself, which you can, if you go to ola.org, you can see all of the bills that have historically been passed or even tabled at Queen's Park. And there's a difference between the bill itself and the ministerial directives. So the ministerial directives would presumably go to, I would assume it's going to like the president's office and then disseminated from there. And these are directives directly from the minister about what has to happen next. But one of the biggest challenges, and you folks can jump in and let me know if I'm incorrect, one of the biggest concerns that I've heard is that the ministerial directive process to enact things bypasses the public. And so let's talk about that for a second. Just stick a pin, as my mummy says, and let's talk about the impact of bypassing the public when the minister now directs the university to act in a particular way. Why might that be problematic?
It's a sneaky power grab for one thing. It's smuggling a kind of power into the bill that is not evident at first glance. And that becomes even more scary when it's combined with the problems that we talked about earlier, like the lack of expertise or consultation at the level of the minister. So, for example, I think about the anonymous complaint line, which is part of the directive that Honor mentioned. And I actually listened in on a lot of the OLA hearings where students were talking about, their needs with respect to anti-racism and equity. And one of the things that came that I heard kind of the most loudly was that students really want to feel heard when they express that a harm has been done. And I cannot think of anything more disempowering to students than a complaint line. I used to live in a Chicago high rise, and I think about submitting a maintenance request, into an anonymous kind of pipeline, and you just kind of don't know what happens. So even setting aside whether the complaints have merit or not, and of course some of them will and some of them won't, I don't see how this even addresses the most kind of basic student need or ask that was kind of heard at those hearings.
I also wonder if they have an anonymous complaint line, how are they going to determine it's anonymous? So where did it come from? Like so on university and college campuses, part of the joy of being on that campus is that there's a bringing together of sort of the public outside community and the internal community. Like our campuses are beautiful, so people can walk and whatever. So when these anonymous complaints are coming in and you have no concept of where they're coming from, I don't see how you can follow up with people to check in on them. Like when I think of what I used to do in the equity office, part of the follow-up was a major part of the work to make sure that people were okay. But I also don't know how you would know whether or not the complaint was coming internally, which actually does sometimes make a difference on how you decide to navigate it, right? And so I don't know. Honor, you had said the anonymous complaints were there, and then also policy, like consequences, right? If somebody had breached one of these policies, do we know if those consequences are also devised by or suggested by the government? Who's deciding what the consequences will be now?
Yeah, so currently, in the directive, certain consequences are included as possibilities, and then universities determine what the policy is and consequences are. It's unclear if that's it. There is a measure of the directive stipulating that the minister can follow up, ask for more information, and so on. So it's unclear how involved the minister specifically will be in the drafting of these policies. Remember, the minister being a partisan actor, right? Wow. And so there are questions there. And then there's also the public posting part of the directive. So the result of these investigations, whichever complaints lead to investigations, and whether complaints don't lead to investigations, all of that has to be posted publicly and sent to the minister and sent to the university's board of directors, I believe. So, and that includes which kind of racism, so dividing racism into the kinds, and what the consequences were and the number of complaints. Yeah.
That's inside the directives. You know what is interesting to me? I remember when there's hate crimes that happen in community and the news reports on the hate crimes, oftentimes they'll just say there was a hate crime and police are investigating. That's it. And one of the questions that raised was that, again, there was so little information that was that we could use to try and support community, right? Because if I just say there was a hate crime, I would have to talk to everybody to see if they happen to know what it was about, who was impacted, etc. So I can understand the need to get a sense of and to track like what the rise and the tide of hate, because it does happen. It's not always folks that are, hating on this particular group that shifts and changes. And that to me is the connection to the broader political climate, because you'll start to see some of that mapped out on the interactions that people have on campus. in general terms, just like the bill, I think it's awesome that they'll be tracking things like that, because I think that's how we can provide more targeted support. But I have very big concerns about tracking if the tracking is for a different kind of purpose. Like if the tracking isn't connected to actual supports, and if the job for this, for addressing the needs of the bill is done just by punishing someone, I don't think that we're actually helping. And so inside these directives, are we seeing anything that says, like what the supports are being made available? Is the government going to invest in mental health supports on campus so that we can actually provide support to people? Invest in equity offices? Is there anything that's talking about that part of this work?
So there is, I think, a line that requires universities and colleges to indicate what proactive measures they're taking to combat, I think, racism and anti-hate. But no, there are no financial supports for that. And so we've seen the kind of increased starvation of post-secondary institutions over the past several years and decades, and including the government of Ontario, the current government, not even providing the funding levels that their own Blue Ribbon panel recommended. And so a really kind of serious state of affairs in universities in terms of funding, and then kind of providing these additional requirements on top of that. And I want to say too, like there's in terms of all the opposition that I was speaking about to this bill, none of that was saying that that I was involved in, right? It was saying that there was any opposition to combating racism and anti-hate on campuses, for instance, right? It was saying that this has to be done in a responsible manner that is, for instance, based on expertise, that is rooted in communities that are going to be affected, and university communities, that is really taking into account best practices in the field. And this kind of punitive approach, this kind of individual kind of targeting individual people, is not one of these best practices. For years, that has not been the approach, right? And that work has, in my understanding, focused more on preventative and reparative approaches.
Yeah.
And Anna was mentioning this earlier as well. And so I think that's an important piece too. There was more I was going to say, but I don't know if you...
No, it's good. It's good. Jordana, was there anything else that stood out for you with these? I know there was a deadline for the in the ministerial directives, for instance. And so like this piece of legislation became law in May. Remember that within our university and college systems, April is when our classes were done for the winter semester. Summer classes aren't attended at the same rate, so it's a different kind of vibe in that moment. And then the universities and colleges, for my understanding, they had to actually submit these equity plans, right? What was the deadline for them, and what does that also tell us about the concerns that folks are raising about these directives?
Yeah, the deadline is January 31st, which is coming up really soon. And what that's meant is that basically the university has to come up with a plan before it has time to go through the usual channels of consultation that are even, I mean, in our case, that are even kind of enshrined in its own policy. For example, our faculty association just had a meeting about this bill a week or two ago, right? By that point, we're just starting to have the conversation, and the deadline for submission is in a few weeks. So, there isn't time for consultation. And what that means is that people are going to have to, a small number of people are just going to have to act really quickly to whip something together without consulting or without, doing research. And that's not great.
This also reminds me of the legislation that was tabled by the Liberals around gender violence prevention, sexual assault prevention on campus. And one of the things that stands out for me in that legislation, and I will actually make sure to add that to our list of resources, But that legislation included within it the need to consult with survivors. Like survivors were the ones that were going to help to devise the process so that they would be well protected in the midst of whatever policies would then have to also be made. And that piece of legislation did require policy change. At the time I wasn't in office, I was actually still, I was overseeing that portfolio actually at Laurier. And as I remember, it was a difficult process because it's not easy to speak to people that have experienced harm and are navigating trauma. But that process pays off when you actually listen to the people that are impacted by the issue at hand. And so it seems odd to me that even in this piece of legislation, they're not looking at other legislation and processes that have dealt with folks that are experiencing or navigating, I would argue, trauma, right? We're talking about mental health and we're talking about anti-racism and hate crimes. So what I'm going to do is ask us all to take a deep breath because that has all been a big, difficult information. We're going to take a very quick break. And then we will come back with another series of questions. I think actually we're going to start moving into a space where we can start talking about what kinds of strategies have actually worked on campus and what we would hope to actually be able to see. Because for the viewers watching, even when something becomes law, there is still an opportunity for us as the public in this democratic society to push back and ask for better. There's always ways that we can try and get pieces of legislation to do the work that we need it to do. So we are going to take a quick commercial break and we'll be right back.
Your Region This Week takes you behind the headlines on issues and events shaping our community. Tune in for new episodes on Mondays at 7:30 p.m. and Fridays at 6 p.m.
Hey, what's up? We're Chris and Cam, host of What's Buzzin' right here on Rogers TV.
We talk about local trends, we interview local guests, and we overall just have a lot of fun.
8 p.m. Wednesday nights on Rogers TV.
Stay tuned.
Hey folks, it's me, Giovanni Petiti, the host of Not Tonight. It's the new late night talk show right here on Rogers TV. We got fabulous guests, a lot of laughs. It's just like the Jimmy Kimmel Show. If you order the Jimmy Kimmel Show on Wish. So join me Sunday at 10 o'clock right here on Rogers TV. Nice.
Today, I helped a senior find transportation to an important medical appointment.
Today, I helped a new mom find virtual programming so she didn't feel so isolated.
Today, I helped someone understand new government supports.
Every day, 211 navigators connect Canadians to critical government and community programs and services.
211. Help starts here.
Sundays for Paris is a service that we believe will help you discover more of God's promises and purpose for your life. A reminder that God is for you. Courtesy of Paris Community Church. Join us every Sunday at 10:30 a.m. on Rogers TV to be encouraged and pointed towards hope.
Welcome back, everyone. So I can't stop thinking about the emphasis in the directives and the bill on individual actors. A long time ago, when we started to do equity work and it was taken more seriously on campuses, there was that focus, like you were looking for the individual bad apple is sometimes the language that they would use. But we realized that really and truly racism operates at the system level. And so even if you remove one person, if the system is still facilitating or creating a context in which people can act poorly to each other, et cetera, you end up in the same boat. And so I I find myself struggling to move away from that space where why are we going backwards to emphasize the individual as opposed to the system harm that happens with racism and hate. So what I'd like to do is to give you folks an opportunity to speak a little bit more about the context, because I feel like the reason that that shift is happening, that we're being pulled backwards, is because of the political climate that we're in right now. And so I'm wondering if you could spend a bit of time just speaking about the social and political climate and the bill, and like how those two things are sort of interacting right now.
Yeah, thanks, Lorme. I think, I mean, this is a political climate in which we're really seeing a lot of attacks on certain parts of the university, particularly anti-racist scholarship and decolonial scholarship. And it's really hard to separate this bill from that context. And this is scholarship that is seeing racism as something that is very systemic, and that is really looking at that and beginning to look at that in a much more open and I think kind of effective and rigorous way. And I think in that context, this bill, and I mean, it's not even just that context. I have to say, in the United States, we're seeing elected officials targeting individual academics, targeting certain kinds of scholarship, anti-racist, decolonial, gender and sexuality scholarship. And the bill can't be seen outside of that context either, right? Particularly the added partisan influence on universities and this very, very new political influence from the ministry, from the minister's office on what happens in universities around certain topics, right? So there's, I have a lot of concern there. And I worry too, there's been unprecedented, targeting, harassment, doxing of individual professors, particularly professors who are doing research in those areas, anti-racism and so on, scholars who are from communities perhaps traditionally excluded from the academy, who fought very hard to get into the academy, or perhaps researching topics that people have fought very hard to include in the university. And there's this, I think really very terrible harassment of some academics who are doing this work in really really serious ways. And I think it's really taking a toll on people, and people are leaving the academy. And that's serious, because that affects, what is researched and what is represented in the research, the knowledge that we look to as a society. And so I think that an approach that targets individuals really risks emboldening that kind of harassment, that kind of singling out individual people as a source of problems, and I really worry about it in that context too.
Absolutely. Jordana, did you want to jump in and talk a little bit about the context in this bill?
Yeah, well, and actually, hearing Honor, I just wanted to add another thing about the kind of the problem with an approach that focuses on individuals. Even if it's not coming from the provincial government, this bill is going to require resources. It's like it's going to require taxpayer money, and there's a question of whether we want that money to go towards ushering complaints through red tape, and then the legal battles that will inevitably, ensue as people find themselves targeted rightly or wrongly by complaints. Like that's where the resources are going to go if this is the direction we move in. And I just don't regardless of how significant you even think that racism and equity issues are at the academy, I just don't see how anybody wants money to be spent in that way. But the second piece, I guess, is about, because I study news a lot, I think about political polarization, and there's Justin Ling just published, the journalist Justin Ling just published a really great study on political polarization in Canada for the Public Policy Forum, and he finds, unsurprisingly, that it's a big concern for many Canadians, and that human rights and equity and mental health, the subjects of this bill, are high up there among themes that people find really polarizing. My view is that, you make things polarizing by giving them over to partisan actors, to politicians, and that you actually kind of take the heat down, you turn the heat down when you find ways to be really meticulous and transparent and evidence-based in the way that you talk about things like race and racism and mental health. So for that reason, to me, the idea of kind of subjecting people to these hasty directives is actually going to like turn up the heat on these issues that are affecting people across the political spectrum, that people are kind of driving a wedge, an ideological wedge. Whereas, if we can continue to work from evidence slowly and carefully, and kind of show our work in terms of, why policy decisions are being made, then we can actually maybe turn the heat down a little bit on polarization.
That's a really good point, because I feel like the offices where staff are hired specifically to create these kinds of policies are operating from that space of trying to take the heat down. A lot of the times they'll speak about harm reduction strategies. So they're trying to find ways to embed this kind of knowledge about the why, like the why, that sort of the backdrop upon which we do equity work more broadly across the institution. But you can't do that work if you're not connected in the institution. And so the minute you start to decide that the person that's going to have the final say on how something happens and whether or not it's working is so far removed from the campus, I don't know how that is truly expected to work. And so it's a really, really important point that you both brought up. I'm also I'm going to take a second to share my own feels because it's my show. But I'm also very concerned about the co-opting of language that says that we're doing equity work that isn't actually doing it from an equity space. And I worry about that because a lot of the students, and I would say there's staff and faculty that reach out to me as well, that know the kind of work that I do, often talk about that. Like, policies, just because they say they're for equity, don't necessarily do the work. And so when we find ourselves rushing to try and create these kinds of strategies in a climate that is so, it just feels very uncertain. I worry about that. My daddy used to always say, hurry brings worry and worry wears you out. And I just feel like we're being forced to hurry and come up with these strategies. But there are equity policies and strategies that already existed on all of our campuses. Like, this is stuff that we were already doing. Out of pure curiosity, because I can't remember offhand, but in the directives, my sense is that it sounds like the directive is to create something new, even if it doesn't say that language, as opposed to tell us what you're doing, what is working, what is not. What is the tone that these directives have been brought to the universities and colleges?
Yeah, it's not tell us what you're doing. There is a bit of that, but it's mainly like, this is what colleges and universities need to have as their kind of policy framework. And this is how it needs to work. These are the different elements of it. If your policy already does that, then tell us that, but that whatever policy you have must be amended if it doesn't have those features already.
Well, I guarantee that people are going to be rushing then, because nobody would be saying, send us anonymous complaints so that we can't truly provide you with the support. On that happy note, I get to do it's my favorite part of the show. I ask everybody this question, and part of my rationale is, especially when we're talking about the more worrisome aspects of our social world, it's important for us to speak into being what we want. And so my question for both of you is this: if you could snap your fingers and you could make one system change, what would it be?
I think I would say that, and it isn't necessarily the system change, but how we would determine the system change for me would be to have conversations as university communities about what we want universities to be. I think that's incredibly important. There's a lot of incredibly important work that happens at universities and a lot of really important mechanisms and traditions and approaches, and also some things that have not been great and need to be changed, that people have been fighting hard to change, that need to continue to change. And I think that this would be a good time to be kind of imagining together what it is that we want for universities, what we want universities to do. Some of that work has already been started. Scholars Strike Canada has been working in that vein, and others as well. And I think it's incredibly important.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that honor. What do you think, Jordana? You could snap your fingers?
Yeah, mine, I guess, is also a kind of an approach or an orientation connected to honors. Maybe when I was in grad school, I worked at the Center for Civic Engagement at Northwestern and learned about asset-based community development by work done by John Kretzmann and John McKnight. And the idea there is basically that you kind of work from what you have. You know, so if I could snap my fingers, it would just be, you know, let's continue doing equity and anti-racism work with the tremendous wealth of resources that we have in terms of expertise, in terms of space and time for students and faculty to interact, you know, the kind of unique gathering spaces that universities are. So let's work with our assets rather than imposing a completely new framework that's detached from those.
Oh my goodness, folks, I so appreciate the time that you have spent with me, sharing about the bill, but also more importantly, sharing your vision for the sector. I'm actually going to ask you, when the show is done, if you can just send me a link or the name of one of those articles, like both of you mentioned different people, because I will literally put that information out as resources for anybody who's watching this particular episode and wanting to get a little bit more information, but I think that would be fantastic. I'm also going to make sure to include, I didn't say this while I'm going to say it right now. There is a group at UCLA Law School. They have a program called Critical Race in the Law or something like that. And they had been tracking the anti-critical race theory legislation over the course of the last 2 years. They started in I want to say 2020, but I could be wrong. They just stopped in December 2024, but they made an interactive map, and you can see all of the policies that have been tabled at all sorts of different levels across the country. And so going back to something that was said around the climate, around how policy is being used to do something that people claim is equity, but is actually destabilizing some of that work, is really, really important. So I'll make sure to share that with you folks as well, since I didn't get to share some bread with you, which is what I would typically do. So thank you so much for coming on. Honor, Jordana. Have an amazing day. I really appreciate you spending time with us.
Thanks, Lorme.
Okay, one more break and we'll be right back.
Public transit, garbage pickup, parks and recreation programs, snow removal on your street. How can you stay informed about these and other important local services? Tune to City Council coverage on Rogers TV. See your community leaders at work on Rogers TV City Council coverage.
Hello, welcome to Lions TV Bingo. An announcement: we are now on Mondays. Yes, every Monday from now on, Lions TV Bingo is going to be here on Rogers. We'll see you this Monday.
Hey everybody, it's Sean Ferfaro reminding you to tune in every Friday night at 6:30 for This Week in Rangers Nation. I'm going to have exclusive highlights and interviews with your Rangers players. I'm going to have Rangers alumni. We're going to talk to some of the coaches, and because it's me, we're going to have a little bit of fun as well. Every Friday at 6:30, everything you want to know here in our town. It's This Week in Rangers Nation right here on Rogers TV.
In para-hockey, the ice tilts in favor of men. But that will never stop us.
United by passion, battling for equity. We are the National Women's Para-Hockey Team of Canada.
We're here.
We're hungry.
We're ready.
Ready to inspire.
Ready to leave our legacy.
Ready to be supported and make history. It's our time. Are you ready?
Hi, I'm Stacey Bester, the host of Sweet Occasions here on Rogers TV. I'm so looking forward to season 7, where we're serving up both sweet and savory dishes. I hope you'll tune in and enjoy all of the flavors that we have for you. And don't forget to make every day a sweet occasion.
Well, hello again, and thank you so much for tuning in. Wasn't it amazing listening to both Honor and Jordana speak about Bill 166? Honestly, what I'm going to do for anybody who is watching, for those that are interested in learning a little bit more, I promise I will have a link for Bill 166 so you can read the legislation. As was discussed, the ministerial directives aren't actually publicly available, so that makes it difficult. However, I will be sure to put up some other resources. I'll definitely put the CRT forward from UCLA's law school. I'll make sure that you have access to that so you can see how other places have tried to track policy changes. There is an open letter that was signed by a number of experts, like hundreds of experts, with concerns raised about Bill 166. I'll be sure to add that. I'm also going to make sure that there are some links to the concerns that were raised by some of the organizations that our guests were talking about. So for instance, OCUFA and COU, the Council for Ontario Universities, were among some of the people who had raised some concerns about the bill. So I'll make sure to put links to those. There were also some authors that Honor and Jordana had spoken about. I've asked them to send me links to some of the articles. Some is about asset-based community building. And so I'll make sure to have some of that information available for you too. Do not forget to follow me on Instagram at everydaypolitics_official. Looking forward to being with you next week. Have a good day.
Connect with us by visiting our website or email us at comments@rogerstv.com.
You.
Kitchener's perfect music mix is on Chime 96.7. So every song is someone's favorite song. On Chime 96.7.
Speed, grace, accuracy, excellence.
David cuts in. Waits, tucks it home. A virtuoso.
Pure fire on ice. You know I'm here for it.
Hey folks, it's me, Giovanni Pettiti, the host of Not Tonight. It's the new late night talk show right here on